This weekend has been set aside to honor our nation's presidents, especially the most exemplary occupants of the Oval Office. The blogosphere these days seems obsessed with the relative performance of our current president, whether he has accomplished remarkably much, given the obstacles that confounded him, or remarkably little, given the opportunities that came his way. My own sense is that most of his friends think he's done too little, and most of his enemies think he's done too much. As to the cadre of those who would be president, I'm looking forward to the day when people will stop asking me, as soon as they hear my last name, whether I'm related to Newt. To avoid confusion on this front, I've taken to saying, just call me Galen. Once in a while, however, I've been able to use my last name to good advantage. In preparing for a recent family celebration, my job was to land a reservation at the kind of restaurant where reservations are hard to come by, which I did. When we arrived at the restaurant, the maitre d' sidled up to us and announced, "Guengerich." Then he asked me, "Are you related to Newt?" I sensed that he had more to say on the matter, so I waffled. Not that I know of. The maitre d' plunged on. "When the speaker comes to town, he dines here, you know." "Oh, really?" I responded, sensing an opportunity. "And which table does the speaker prefer?" The maitre d' pointed out a couple of prime tables, and when he indicated one that was open, I pounced. "Great, that one will be fine." Here's my bottom line on Newt. He has great taste in tables. Actually, Newt has caused me enough grief over the past couple of decades that a good table is the least he can do. He should have picked up the tab. But I digress. As to another of the would-be presidents, the economics blog of the New York Times reports that Mitt Romney appeared on Fox News one morning this week to explain why his positions today are more conservative than when he was the governor of Massachusetts. The reason he has become more conservative, Romney reportedly explained, is that living a life tends to make you more conservative. The blog rightly notes that this view echoes a saying often attributed, perhaps apocryphally, to Winston Churchill. "If you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative at 40, you have no brain." While this may be conventional wisdom, the data suggested by the blog points out the fact that it is probably wrong. It's true that at any given time, older people are likely to be more conservative than younger people. But relative to themselves as younger people, today's older folks have generally become more liberal than they once were. A study published several years ago in the American Sociological Review examined social data from 1972 to 2004. The authors looked at a variety of beliefs about socially divisive issues, women in the workforce, causes of poverty, civil liberties, privacy, premarital sex, divorce, and so on. As a given cohort of people grew older, their attitudes did change. Here's the surprise. According to the study, the direction of change is most often toward increased tolerance rather than increased conservatism. On these terms, Romney's willingness to swim against the tide and become more conservative as he grows older makes him, well, radical. Who knew? I'm sure that no one will be more shocked at this discovery than Mr. Romney, and no one will be more pleased than Mr. Santorum. Be that as it may, however, Romney's comment reminded me of why I find much of the conversation among the would-be presidents off-putting. It's not the party they represent. As many of you know, I have great respect for historic big tent republicanism and even an affinity for some elements of classic conservatism. I just don't see much of either in evidence these days. Make no mistake, most Democrats aren't any better in this respect either. They've joined Romney in swimming against the tide. Instead of becoming more open-minded and tolerant as they grow older, most politicians become more narrow-minded and more self-certain. The usual progression these days seems to be this. When I was a child, I thought as a child and spoke as a child. I knew nothing about anything. But as I matured, I learned more and more. My experience became more extensive, and my knowledge became more comprehensive. My convictions became more certain. At some point, my experience became so capacious, and my knowledge so extensive, and my convictions so absolute, that I knew it was time to run for president. Here's the problem. Life doesn't work this way. As sociology, not to mention common sense, reveals, the trend moves in exactly the opposite direction. It's young people who know everything. Ask any 13-year-old. What you should learn as you grow older is not how much you know, but how little. Even taken collectively, human knowledge remains fragmentary and human ignorance profound. The longer we live, the more we learn that many of life's problems are intractable and their solutions forever elusive. People who claim otherwise aren't just delusional, they are sometimes downright dangerous. You may already have known that the Nobel Prize-winning poet Wisława Szymborska died 2 weeks ago at the age of 88. Born in 1923 in a small town in Poland, she lived her entire life from age 6 in Krakow. With Hitler savaging Poland in her teens and Stalin serving as its overlord in her 20s, she experienced a full measure of the 20th century's turmoil and tragedy, as well as, in her later years, its potential for change and renewal. As major poets go, Szymborska wrote relatively few poems, and she mostly shunned the public eye. But her trenchant observations of life and politics, distilled in her poems, make her writings an essential companion to anyone who aspires to live a well-lived life, whether in office or not. In Szymborska's poem titled "In Praise of Feeling Bad About Yourself," she writes, "The buzzard never says it is to blame. The panther wouldn't know what scruples mean. When the piranha strikes, it feels no shame. If snakes had hands, they'd claim their hands were clean. A jackal doesn't understand remorse. Lions and lice don't waver in their course. Why should they when they know they're right? Though hearts of killer whales may weigh a ton, in every other way they're light. On this third planet of the sun, among the signs of bestiality, a clear conscience is number one."